This is the first lecture of Anatomy and Physiology. I'm Mr. Adolph, and we're going to get started with our intro unit for Anatomy and Physiology. So we're going to start off with some simple definitions. And the terms anatomy and physiology are ones that you're probably very familiar with. More anatomy than physiology, but you're probably familiar with both. So let's just take a look at those words and what they mean. Pretty basic. Anatomy just deals with the form and the arrangement of its body parts. So basically, we're looking at what it looks like. Physiology, on the other hand, is the functions and how they operate. So anatomy is what it looks like, physiology is what it does. And those two things go hand in hand. There's something you're going to hear me say a lot in this class, and that is form equals function. What that means is, very simply, if it looks like it does something, it probably does it. And that's why I love anatomy. Everything makes a lot of sense. If a bone is shaped a particular way, it's because that's its purpose. It has a job that needs that shape. Nature doesn't like waste. Nature is really good at conserving resources. So when you look at the anatomy of a human being, we are built in a way that works for what we use it for. So it makes total sense. And it's one of the main reasons why I really like this course. I like when there's a reason for something. There's only a handful of situations in our understanding of the human body that we really don't fully understand. Almost everything, if you look at it, you can probably figure out what it does. So as we go through, we're going to focus on both anatomy and physiology. If I'm going to be honest, I like teaching the physiology portion better because anatomy really is just pointing at something and telling you what it is. That's not the most interesting thing in the world. Physiology, on the other hand, is how it works. And to me, it's amazing how the body works. And we're going to get into all that as we go through. The first part of this section, we're going to really just get into some basic biology stuff and just a little bit about the organization of the human body and life in general. So just like anything, things are built from a smaller component and then they build in complexity as you go up. One thing I spent a little time with last week was the idea that we are machines, right? We are built out of trillions of cells. And the fact that all these cells were able to work together to make your body run is just an amazing thing. And the way it's able to do that is because it's organized from the smallest structure all the way up to the most complex in a way that allows it to do its job, right? So let's talk about these levels of organization. The first level of organization that we're going to talk about here, if you take something that's living and break it down to its smallest component, it's going to be an atom. And the atoms are the particles which make up matter. And one of the most fascinating things to me is the fact that when you look at a human being, we're really not made up of that many different types of atoms. There's about maybe 8 to 10 elements that make up a majority of the human body, right? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. Those are the main ones. And then, there's magnesium, there's a lot of other minerals that are involved that make up components, but a majority of what you are is really just carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And it's how those molecules are put together, it's how those atoms are put together, which allows for the complexity that makes a human. An organelle is the next level up. So these atoms form together and eventually they form molecules, and these molecules are going to form these structures called organelles. So as we know, cells have components much like our body has organs, and these components are called organelles. And each of these structures has its own specific task. So you learned about this in biology. For example, if you look at the endoplasmic reticulum, the job of the endoplasmic reticulum is very similar to our circulatory system. It allows molecules to pass around the cell. It gets RNA to where it needs to go to make proteins. So you can really compare the organs of the human body to the organelles. So the organelle is the next level up on the level of complexity. And then you get your cell, right? So cellular biology is an area that I'm very interested in. The cell is an amazing structure, and it's life. That is life right there. It's the basic unit of life. And it's a hard thing to really wrap your head around. Sometimes you don't even want to think about it. But what we are is really, we're people, right? We have an identity. If you look in the mirror, you see yourself. But if you really stop and think about it, we're not a person. We are a community of cells. And these individual cells, like I said earlier in this little lecture, they all are able to work together to make your body function. And one thing that is really fascinating to me is they're always being replaced. So you're not a stagnant body. Your body is always changing. Every 7 years, most of the cells in your body have been replaced. So you're really a new person every 7 years. And that's a wild thing to really think about. These cells form together, and eventually, if you get enough of the similar cell in the same area, they're going to form something called a tissue. And a tissue is just a specialized group of cells that organize into layers or masses. They can either be flat layers or they can be clumps that are masses, and these tissues have a specific job. So you can think of that, if we're thinking of it in terms of a society of people, there's a group of people that might be the sanitation workers, and they're individual people, but together they make up the sanitation department and they have a job to do. So the individual cell is going to form together and bind with, essentially, they're going to make connections with other cells, and they're going to form tissues. And those tissues are eventually, if you get enough tissue in one area, you're going to get an organ. So an organ is a group of tissues with the same specialized function. Now, when you look at an organ, it's not just one type of tissue. Actually, every one of your organs has multiple types of tissue. There's going to be connective tissue, which is holding it together. There's going to be epithelial tissue, which connects it to the other organs. And there's going to be muscle and nerve in there. So an organ is going to be made up of a group of tissues, but they all have the same general function. For example, we have organs like our kidneys, right? Your kidneys have an important job. They are responsible for water regulation in your body, and also for the filtration of your blood. And then you have other organs like your heart, which is really a muscle, and the job of your heart is to move blood through your blood vessels. So organs are groups of tissues that work together to complete a job, essentially. Finally, those organs are going to work together to be an organ system, and we actually have 11 organ systems in the body, and those 11 organ systems have major jobs, and we're going to talk about those organ systems a little later in this unit. So an organ system is made up of several organs that provide the same function. So, for example, the most complex organ system in your body, the organ system with the most individual organs, is going to be your digestive system. And that makes sense because we take it for granted, but digestion is a really hard thing to do. We have to take something that is like a hot dog or, a piece of fruit, and we have to somehow get those pieces of food small enough that they can be absorbed into our cells, diffuse into the cells, and then be assimilated into our actual functioning body. So a huge portion of our anatomy is devoted to digestion. And then finally, when you take that organ system and you add it to the other 10 organ systems, you're going to get something called an organism. And that is when you have a bunch of organ systems all interacting together to make a single organism. So yes, we are organisms, but if you really break it down to its smallest components, we're actually a bunch of atoms that have somehow managed to stay stable enough to form you for the length of your life. So it's pretty amazing. This picture just pretty much encapsulates what I just said. We have our atom, which eventually you're going to have atoms come together to form a molecule. Those molecules are going to form together to make a macromolecule. We learned about those in biology class. Carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids are the 4 types of macromolecules in the human body. And in life in general, those are the 4 macromolecules that we talked about. And those macromolecules are going to form together to make organelles. Those organelles are going to be in a cell, so the cell is that next level up. Those cells are going to connect to each other to form a tissue. Those tissues, if there's enough of them in a certain area that have the same job, that is going to make an organ. Those organs are going to form what we call an organ system. And then finally, that organ system is going to make up an organism.